All right, I'm back. I'm home. I'm ready to go live and start back in this process again. I tried while I was on the road to do a live feed, and for some reason that day we weren't able to connect to the internet. So I ended up with a mess. I ended up with something going streaming one place and audio in one place and video in another place, and it was a nightmare. So I'm back, and we're going to do this live from here now, and should be able to have a better control of the experience, except for the fact that I went off without my tripod, and so I am missing my tripod. So I will have to be doing this from my laptop, which is fine. I have no problem with that. Matter of fact, we'll do whatever we have to do. Okay, so. Let's let Facebook build a little audience here. We'll get started. Made the announcement today. It's been a little erratic while I've been on the road, and so I understand that people are not able to come in when the announcement goes out. But today I want to talk about something that's extremely important. I had no idea how important these things that we were talking about were going to be as we moved into closer and closer to the time for the vote on a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. Lots of things that people are voting on. Hey, Don, good to see you. And I know Larry's on with us and others. So this is what I want you to see. This morning, we've been talking about those things. And one of the things that we talked about on a particular day at 9 o'clock in the morning was how important the definition of terms are. And when you define the terms, you really set the tone for the debate. And I watched later that day a little clip of Amy Klobuchar questioning Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court. And she was asked a question, and Amy Coney Barrett said, "So what's your definition of the term?" And I thought, see, that's the reason why this is so important, is because if Klobuchar wants to change the definition of the term, she needs to let us know. She needs to make that clear. And if not, then Amy Barrett was going to go on the term as it is traditionally used. And that's the reason why that term had such an important value. Good morning, Steve. And minus that, you're going to have trouble. The words have meanings. They have a place. They have a prominence in the conversation. So if you can't use the right terms, you're going to have a problem. So we talked about terms on Tuesday. Interestingly enough, that afternoon, terms became a really important issue in the questioning for the Supreme Court to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. Which, by the way, I'll just make this really clear. I think that the right thing to do is to fill the vacancy. I think this whole thing to let the voters decide, that's not in the Constitution. The voters don't decide in the Constitution. They decide on the Senate and they decide on the president. They don't decide on the Supreme Court. So the process should be followed exactly as it is intended. All right, it looks like we're getting some additional issue here with posting comments. So hopefully you have given StreamYard permission so you can post comments and we'll be able to see those. I don't know what's going on. Seems like the technology has been struggling. We've been struggling with. But today I'm going to talk about evidence. And when I had figured out that I was going to talk about evidence last week, early in the part of the week, and day 4 was going to be on evidence, I had no idea what was going to come up in the world that we live in. So let me talk about evidence for just a little bit. There's some things that relate to evidence that are very, very important, because when you say, here is the evidence, then with that comes a certain amount of responsibility. And there are 3 things that we want to take a look at today that have to do with the rules of evidence. All right. And the first one is, the first rule of evidence is the source. Where did the evidence come from? That's a legitimate question. So where did the evidence come from? We've just gone through a 3-year time period in our country where the evidence came from an unnamed, undisclosed whistleblower, and the evidence was never made known. So the question of the source was that we had politicians, and I use that word in the right sense today. We had politicians who were saying, we have incontrovertible evidence that will prove that there was, and you can just fill in the blank. In this case, it happened to be Russian collusion, but we never saw the evidence. In fact, what we saw was exactly the opposite of evidence. It wasn't evidence. The source has to be questioned. If you say that this is what happened, there has to be some source for that evidence. It can't just be an unnamed person who refuses to testify, who refuses to be made public. And then you can't say, we have it, but we can't let it go. That's not, you can't do that. There has to be a source of the evidence. The second thing is, and this one's really important, and this one bothers me the most with what we've seen in the last week. What we've seen in the last week has been that we had, and I'm gonna name this one by name. We had a hard drive that showed up that belonged to Hunter Biden. Now, that's not a Hunter Biden issue. That's really not a Hunter Biden issue. And it's very important that you understand that the reason why this is so important isn't because Hunter Biden got caught with a crack pipe. We all know he's got a drug problem. We've known he's had a drug problem forever. But why a company in the oil and gas industry in Ukraine would hire somebody with a known drug problem to be on their board of directors, I don't have a question to that one, but it does validate the fact that that was going on while he was on the board. So, but that's not the issue. The real issue is the custody of that evidence. Where was the evidence? Now, there's several things that are important here. Is it possible that emails would be found on a hard drive? Yes. Is it possible that that hard drive would be found in the general area where the players lived? And the answer to that question is yes. Now, if this was found in Sao Paulo, Brazil, you'd have a reason to question it, right? I mean, it's the custody. What's the source, and who's had custody of this? Now, the shop owner had custody of the hard drive, and that is a legal, legitimate thing. There's no problem with that. He made copies of those hard drives, and he also notified people that if anything happens to me, this is where you'll find them. And I think in today's world, that's probably a really smart thing to do. But this is what he did next. He took those same hard drives, he took the copies of those two hard drives, and he gave one to Rudy Giuliani and one to the FBI. I have major problem with that custody, that chain of custody that you follow here. I don't have any problem with the source. I don't have any problem with the fact that it was found on a hard drive. You would expect it to be found on a hard drive. You would expect that correspondence to be found on the hard drive. What you don't expect is for someone like Rudy Giuliani to have possession of that and sit on it for nearly a year. That's the thing that bothers me. That's a chain of custody question that comes up. Now, I will say this, that Giuliani had been saying for over a year that he had other evidence. So I will give him credit for that, but I'm really bothered by the fact that the major political player in this chain of custody happened to be Rudy Giuliani. Not that I question Rudy Giuliani's ethics and that kind of thing. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm just saying that that's not a good place for the chain of custody to have ended up step two. Okay. And then the other question is, so if the FBI's had it for a year, how come we didn't know about it? Because it's the FBI. You're not supposed to know about it. The FBI doesn't publish ongoing cases. They're not going to make that information public. So that becomes really important. Don't look at the lack of action by the FBI for a year as something that is an indication that they didn't believe what was given to them or what they had possession of. What that means is that they were doing what you would expect them to do for you. And what you would expect them to do for you is you would expect them to process the case in the normal fashion, normal manner in which it should take place. Now, I believe, just as Don just said, that what was happening was that Giuliani was waiting for the FBI to make a decision. I think that was the right thing to do. So, but understand this, in that chain of custody, it's really important that you not have a hiccup in that chain of custody. This could be identified as, if for the person defending the Biden family, and this is not just Hunter Biden, it's the Biden family. It's important for them to have they could, the defendant for that could easily find some fault with the fact that Giuliani was the only person who had that. That's the concern about the chain of custody. But evidence always has a chain. It was found here. It was given to this person. It was taken here. It went this way. When something is collected at a crime scene, it goes. It's put in a bag. That bag is sealed. The bag is identified. It's taken to it's taken to the holding room at the law enforcement agency, and it's kept there under the proper custody of that evidence that's been collected. I don't know. I don't have any way to verify. I could, but I don't have any way to verify. It's not worth the effort. I'm not going to look to see if all that had been handled properly, and or what had happened to that hard drive when it was in the possession of the FBI. That's another question. But there is, when you look at evidence, you have the source. Where did it come from? And is the source of that evidence legitimate? Is that a true factual potential place in somebody that would be in normal possession of that information? And the fact is that that kind of information would be stored on a hard drive. That's not unusual that it would be found in that place. It's not unusual who you have pictures on that hard drive of him sleeping in bed with a crack pipe. Not unusual to understand that probably got knocked into the bathtub and got water damage. All of that makes perfect sense. So the source is legitimate. The second thing is that the custody. I think that there is a chain of custody here that kind of makes sense. So you have to look at that chain of custody, make sure that it makes good sense. Okay, I don't think that you can shoot holes in that. But the third thing becomes really important and that is credibility. Is there some validation of what's in possession here by something else? So can you take a look at this evidence that was uncovered here and then find other things that collaborate that evidence? Because then you have added credibility. What happens in a story, and I told you all this in the Storymaker program that I have, the Storyteller program, that one of the things that you look for is that if you can verify certain facts, then you have reason to believe that the other facts are true as well. So when you look at this story, what you have is you have what I believe is a credible source. I think you have a fairly fail-safe chain of custody that took place. And then the third thing that you have, and I understand that the original hard drive is still in somebody's possession. Okay, so what you have is copies, but the original hard drive is still in somebody's possession. And I'm sure that will be called out, and that will validate that whole chain of custody, and it will remove any doubt having been cast upon, or any doubt that would have been cast upon that chain of custody. The third thing is the credibility. If there are things on that drive that can be validated somewhere else, then there's reason to believe that what's there is in fact true, factual, and needs to be investigated. Now, what we're seeing now is that there are other things that are coming to play. Because if this is here on this hard drive, and there are other people that are involved, and there were other people that were involved. When you're hiding money, there's always other people that are involved. And some of those other people are starting to talk. And what that does is it validates it gives credibility to all of the evidence that's found here. In a debate, you do exactly the same thing. That's the reason why these rules are so important and they can't be violated, is because if I am going to look at any example, this is going to be true in sales, it's going to be true in storytelling, it's going to be true in anything that you do. You want to make sure that you have those three things in place, that your story has a good source. That's the reason why I don't want to be anonymous when I speak. I will try to give you people's names, dates, times, places, locations. If you have those things, it helps validate the source. The next one is the chain of custody. Okay, where was this found? Where did it go? Who had possession of it? Was anybody able to change it? Was anybody able to modify that? We have somebody who's in serious trouble right now. Serious trouble right now because they changed an email from he was not to he was. There's just about that's I don't know how you change something from one to the other. It was either that way or the other way around. But it was 180 degrees the opposite of what had been said. And that chain of custody, then it becomes, as Don had said earlier, the fruit of the poison tree. If that stuff gets modified, if I have an email and I change some of the content of that email, then I have tossed that whole thing out. It's no longer valid. That custody has caused there to be a lack of credibility. And we have other partners that are involved. As Don says, there's other partners who were involved in this situation. And those other partners have been talking and are talking now. And what that does is it takes this piece of evidence over here and it begins to build a much better case around the outside of it, because there are other players that are involved in this situation. And those other players are starting to sing like songbirds. And I had somebody the other day who gave me this article, said, see, this is proof that this thing is false. It's a hoax. It's bogus. It's been debunked. And I read the article and it said, this is not true. That's not evidence. Just because a reporter at some place said this is not true doesn't make it not true. Give me your evidence. Prove to me that it's not true. The burden of proof is, if you're going to say it's not true, you're going to prove to me it's not true. Okay? So just a little insight into the world in which we're living right now and how you take a look at these things and the perspective you need to have when you do so. Because if you fail to have the right perspective, a perspective that courtrooms are going to look at, perspectives that judges are going to be expected to look at, a perspective that attorneys are going to be looking at, then you'll look at the articles and you won't have a way to decipher what's happening there. So I thought it would be valuable for us to look at this, because in the event that something else takes place, like, I mentioned this before. One time when I was in the insurance business, this phone call said, Eric, you're a really nice guy, but we plan to sue you. And I said, that's great. Can you tell me what the basis of the lawsuit is going to be? And they told me, and I said, let me help you with that, because you have some facts that are not correct. I don't want to get in a pardon me, but for the proverbial pissing match until you understand all the facts. And you have to understand the facts, because the facts are what matters. They always matter. They always matter. No matter what anybody says, the facts come down to the thing that the court's going to look at. The facts come down to the thing that's going to be important in the decision-making process. I'm going to wrap it up with this. This is the reason why I'm so bothered by people trying to give specific examples to the appointee, Judge Amy Coney Barrett, and say, basically what they're saying is that if this case comes before you, how are you going to rule on it? Well, she hasn't seen the facts yet. She hasn't seen the evidence yet. She hasn't seen the case has been presented. That's totally unfair, and that's trying to take democracy and apply it to our legal system. And those two things don't go together. Democracy and legalism, the legal system, do not go together. They're not intended to go together. The judicial system must look at the facts, the rules, the evidence, the case that's presented, and make a decision based upon that, not based upon the political climate in our society. And God help us if we keep stacking that kind of burden on the court so that it becomes whoever has the majority. I told you a week ago, the majority gets us in trouble. That's the reason why we have an unbalanced court. We have 9 judges. And whatever you do, and I don't care how you vote. Well, I kind of care, but I don't really care how you vote. Whatever you do, don't put people in office who have the intention of changing the number of judges that sit on the court, because that distorts the evidence and it makes it a political party and not a judicial system. Justice can be fair. Justice can be fair even when laws are not. Keep that in mind. All right, so just a little bit of understanding about the rules of evidence today so that we can have a better understanding of what's going on in our world. Thank you for joining me today. I'll look forward to talking to you tomorrow.